All right. So tonight, tonight here in the northeastern United States, I am going to continue our introduction to the sort of field of Yangsheng Fa, the nourishing life teachings of Chinese medicine. And today I'm going to continue this introduction to the various sort of theoretical frameworks that we'll be employing. We already talked a little bit about fluctuations of yin and yang in the environment at different times of the day. And harmonizing our bodies with that. That theme will continue to come up over and over again as we go through the course. Sorry, just see if I can get this set here. So we talked about that a little bit. And today we're going to continue our discussion a little bit just by introducing the wuxing, the 5 phases of Chinese medicine. Now, there's a lot that can be said about the wuxing, just like there's a lot that can be said about yin-yang theory, which we will get to later on, I'm sure, because these frameworks, both yin and yang and the wuxing, are broad theoretical frameworks which can be applied to almost any phenomena in life. Certainly, yin and yang can be, these principles can be used to describe aspects of almost anything, right? They are fundamentally referring to duality, and everything has dual nature in different ways. Anything in life can be subdivided further into a yin component and a yang component, and within the yin component can be found traces of yang, and thus can be subdivided further into yin and yang components, further and further and further, right? This is the idea. And this principle of yin and yang, the principle of intertransformation, how the yin, when it reaches its apex, will transform into yang, and the yang, when it reaches its apex, will transform into yin. The theory of interdependence, when there is yin, there is yang. The way the different sort of principles by which yin and yang interact are guides for understanding all manner of natural phenomena. So far, we just talked a little bit about different cycles of life, which you can map yin and yang onto, like the life cycle as a whole, the rising of yang, and then the descending of yang and the rising of yin. We talked about the cycle of the year. We talked about the cycle of the seasons, the cycle of the moon phase, the yang time of the month being the full moon, the yin time of the month being the new moon. And of course, we talked about the cycle of the day and yin and yang. But of course, these principles can be applied to almost anything. The characters for yin and yang actually depict the shady side of a hill and the sunny side of a hill, respectively. The sunny side, of course, being yang, and the shady side being yin. I think a interesting way of depicting yin and yang, because, of course, as the sun moves, the yin side can become the yang side and vice versa, right? Yin and yang transform into each other. Neither exists in isolation. And similarly with the wuxing, the 5 phases, none of the 5 phases exist in isolation, just like none of the organs of the body exist in isolation. They all depend on each other in order to function properly and to move through properly. Now, like I mentioned last time, the wuxing, though often translated as 5 elements, the word element is not quite right, is not totally appropriate in certain respects, because element tends to make us think of something in a static, fixed state, whereas the word xing actually means movement or phase. So it's kind of 5 transformations, 5 movements, 5 phases. And what at their most basic level they are movements of qi, movements of energy, almost kind of pulsations of qi. And so they are metaphors, of course, right? We're not literally talking about fire, and we're not literally talking about wood, and we're not literally talking about water. There is some people will you'll find written some places that, you know, the ancient Taoists or the ancient Chinese kind of looked into the world and saw these different forces, these natural forces like trees growing and fire burning and stuff like that. And then they thought, oh, well, you know, that must be how the inside of the body works or something like that. They used the outside world to understand and imagine what the inside might be, which is really not giving the ancient Chinese enough credit, right? These Chinese medicine is a highly developed, highly sophisticated system. It's not just that these primitive people looked at fire and thought, oh, there must be a fire in here in my heart. That's not it, right? What is kind of clearly to me more true, and certainly I have many teachers who think this way as well. It's just so clearly true that the field of Chinese medicine was created by highly cultivated individuals who had high levels of ability to sense into and ting, to listen to their own embodied being, to their own to their insides, essentially, to sense and perceive their own bodies, and in some cases the bodies of others. And they used these forces of nature that they perceived on the outside, fire and wood and water and metal and earth, to as metaphors to understand these different movements, different processes on the inside. And that's important to note. And I'm sure this will be something that I talk about in future classes, but Chinese medicine really is a medicine, and I have a whole book that I'm writing about this, that is based on people's highly cultivated people perceiving their own bodies and the bodies of others in their own direct lived experience. It is not it's not, as many people seem to think today, this kind of primitive attempt to grasp a reality that we now fully understand through Western anatomy, right? There's this modern way of looking at Chinese medicine and the channel system and the theoretical framework as this very primitive thing that was developed by people who just didn't actually know how the body worked, and thus kind of imagined things. So they must have imagined that the blood vessels actually were the 12 primary channels, right? Or they must have imagined that the whatever, right? Like that's not how it happened. That's just not how it happened. That's not what Chinese medicine is. It's not a primitive version of Western medicine. It's a completely different medical paradigm based on a completely different way of perceiving and sensing and understanding the nature of the body, and even what a body is, as I discussed in earlier classes, right? The body not just as a physical thing that one has, but as a person, right? An embodied person, what someone is. So the 5 phases are kind of metaphors and frameworks, theoretical frameworks for understanding a myriad of different things within the body. It's just a framework that can be applied to many different phenomena, just like yin and yang can be. And of course, these 5 phases are used in different contexts, or in different ways in different contexts, just like yin and yang are. And they refer to, on the most fundamental level, I would say, different movements of qi. Wood is a movement of qi upward and outward. It's a kind of straight line, a straight directional movement, rising. Fire is an expansion outward. Earth is a kind of twisting or knotting or splitting apart kind of energy. Metal is a contraction inward, and water is a sinking. And that's what these are. And the 5 phases, of course, are mapped onto, like I said, all sorts of different things. For the purpose of Chinese medicine, most notably the zong fu, the organ systems, and of course the related channels to the zong fu. There are some systems that relate to the 5 phases, even to the channels beyond the 12 primary channels, classifying the divergence and the lows and the sinews according to different elements. That's one framework from one tradition. But certainly the 12 primary channels, right? You have the fire channels, which are the heart, the small intestine, the sanjiao, and the pericardium. We have the earth channels, right? The spleen, the stomach. We have the metal channels, the lung and large intestine. We have the water, which is the bladder and the kidney. And we have the wood, which is the liver and the gallbladder. And these systems, right? These zong fu, these viscera, these channels, of course, have relationships with the kind of energetic movements associated with each of the wuxing. And then in the wuxing, we can see in this diagram, these arrows, we have these different relationships, right? Because the wuxing are one interdependent sort of whole, where we have the Sheng cycle, the nourishing cycle, where we have wood nourishes fire, fire nourishes wood, earth nourishes metal, metal nourishes water, or water nourishes wood. This is sometimes known as the like engendering cycle, or the birth cycle, or even the parent, as in wood would be the parent of fire, fire would be the parent of earth, earth metal, metal water, water wood. In that it's kind of giving birth to the other. And this makes sense even in terms of a metaphor, right? Wood, when it's burned, that's fire. Fire, the ashes become the earth. Earth, the earth compacts and it becomes metal, or what was originally actually crystal. Metal, the metal element was often associated actually with like quartz or crystal or something. That this is a more of a stretch, but that can collect condensation, which is water. In other cases, metal is actually associated with clouds because of its connection with the po, the corporeal soul, it's often translated as, which is very much linked with kind of notions of clouds, and that collects water, and then water, of course, engenders wood. We have that, and then we have the the Ke cycle, which is the controlling cycle, which is sort of this star in the middle of the diagram, which is the way that the phases not just nourish each other, but keep each other in balance or in check. So wood controls earth, meaning the wood energy, which is this sort of straight movement, controls the earth energy, keeps it in balance, which is a kind of circular or more kind of splitting energy. Earth controls and keeps water in balance, right? The metaphor that's often used is earth holds water. Water keeps fire in balance, right? Water puts out fire. Fire keeps metal in balance. Fire presumably can melt metal, and metal can keep wood in balance, which metal like an axe can chop the wood. In the same way, wood can kind of break through the earth like a sprout or a seedling giving birth to a tree. So that's what we have. Now, the controlling cycle, right? These cycles can get out of balance in various different ways. The controlling cycle can be overly controlling, like if the wood overacts on the earth or the earth overacts on the water, which are important relationships for the Zongfu, the viscera of Chinese medicine. Very, very important for understanding, and I'm sure we'll go over that at different times in different ways as the class goes on. There can also be the reverse Ke cycle, where there's a kind of sort of rebellion, where the earth would rebel against and mess with the wood, or the fire would mess with the water, or the wood would insult the metal, and as I say this, I have in mind all of the different sort of organ relationships that are related to this, right? Wood and earth, right? That relationship is heavily linked with the digestive system. Metal and wood, that relationship is heavily linked, of course, with the respiratory system and the relationship between the lungs and the diaphragm. Water and fire, of course, the heart and the kidneys, the axis of vitality and alignment in the body. But of course, that's more information than we need to go into right now. Now, the wuxing are also associated with the five emotions, which I mentioned before. Of course, in Chinese medicine, each of the viscera is not just associated with different kind of anatomical components or components of physiology. They're also associated with an emotional quality. They're associated with a quality of mind. When the five emotions are when these viscera get out of balance and when the mind gets out of balance. So what we have is when the wood phase, or the liver or gallbladder, gets out of balance, this is the basis of anger and frustration. When the fire phase gets out of balance, that can create kind of overexcitement, or some translate this as, but joy is exactly a path. It's a kind of manic, ungrounded joy that is considered an imbalance, right? In this case, the emotions are considered pathogens. They're considered imbalances fundamentally. Today, in our culture, we often think of the emotions as these really precious personal things. Oh, this is my anger. This is my sadness. There's a tendency to identify with them strongly. From a Chinese medicine perspective, they're just imbalances. They're just imbalances of the mind. The earth phase is worry or overpensiveness. The metal phase is grief, and the water phase is fear. And the reason why these are understood to be imbalances of the mind, and I'll no doubt talk about this more later, is because the Chinese medical view is that the mind, when it's in a healthy state, the metaphor that's often used is that it is like a pool of water. And a clear, settled pool of water clearly reflects the sky, right? It's sort of a remarkable thing if you find a pool of water in the woods and there's a clearing or something, and you can look into that pool of water. It almost looks like you're looking into the sky. It can be so purely reflective. That's what the mind in its ideal state is like. It's unperturbed and it's clear, and it is purely kind of reflecting reality in a sense. It's like a reflective surface. However, when we become emotional, these are like perturbations in the water. They're like ripples in the water. And what do the ripples do? Well, they distort the image. Sometimes they distort the image so heavily that it's hard to tell even what it's reflecting at all. And this is what the emotions do from a Chinese medicine perspective. If we're caught in afflicted states of anger or overexcitement or intense worry, grief, or fear, we are unable to perceive clearly, and the mind is not still. The mind is it's perturbed, basically. It's distorted, right? The clear seeing is distorted, and certainly this is just certainly how it is, right? The emotions are not these precious things that we ought to hold on to. They are distortions. And as hard as that can be for people to, I think, accept sometimes, because we live in an overly emotionally addicted culture, right? Almost everything from the news to pretty much all forms of media, certainly television and movies and even music, right? It's designed to bring up strong emotions, because strong emotions have a kind of addictive quality, and it's easy to sell a strong emotion, right? It's very, very easy. I mean, advertisers know this, right? Advertisers will commercials are always about eliciting some kind of emotional response. Usually, sometimes it's excitement, right? Often it is fear. Often it's fear. And sometimes anger, that can be an easy way to rope people in too. I mean, just look at social media algorithms and stuff like that, right? There's all sorts of ways in which showing someone something that makes them angry over and over can get them to engage more and more, right? We get addicted to these emotional qualities, and that is what pulls us out of balance in our lives in so many ways. Because in Chinese medicine, the viscera and different aspects of the body are linked with these emotions. It's understood that when the liver gets out of balance, it can create a tendency towards anger and frustration, but also anger and frustration will damage the liver system, right? And same with fire, all of these, right? If we overly worry, that will tax the spleen and stomach, and that's our digestive system, right? So long before kind of modern studies showed that there are neurons in the gut, and there's the kind of what's called the enteric nervous system, this sort of second brain in the gut, which explains why people who often have digestive disorders also have a tendency toward overthinking or worry or different emotional issues. Thousands of years before that breakthrough discovery, Chinese medicine has understood that, right? There's a clear connection between overthinking, worrying, overpensiveness, and disharmony of the digestive system. And this is something that I think actually probably most or all kind of medicines probably understood in different ways. And it's something that actually becomes relatively clear if we are not so tuned out of our own embodied experience that we can't listen to our bodies at all, which sadly, we're sort of educated from a young age in our culture to relate to life just from our heads and just relate to our thoughts, as opposed to actually listen to our bodies, listen to our gut, but if we listen to our gut, it's very, very clear, this relationship. But I think it's a symptom of our culture and how disembodied we actually are, that we need some kind of, that people are so excited about this whole breakthrough of the discovery of the enteric nervous system. Of course, it's fascinating to know that there are neurons in the gut, but the implications of it shouldn't be that surprising to us. It's not, human cultures have known for a long time that there's a connection between the digestive system and one's psychological and emotional state. So anyway, so we have these 5 emotions, and these are imbalances in Chinese medicine. They are imbalances. They are essentially pathogens. And even in some cases, certainly in the case of certain arts, like cultivational arts, like Neigong and stuff, the emotions almost can be like literal pathogens, almost with a kind of energetic substance to them that can be purged from the body. Now, the 5 phases are not just associated with pathology, though. Just when they get out of balance, right? They also can be associated with their virtuous qualities, right? When they are in balance. And when these phases are in balance in the system, when the Zongfu are in balance, they produce de. And de is often translated as virtue, or you could call de skillful qualities of mind. And they are, this is sort of the flip side to the distorted versions of aspects of mind that manifest as the emotions. So, for instance, like love would not be considered an emotion in Chinese medicine. It would be considered an example of de. Now, in many ways, as much as it might seem pessimistic to people today to think, oh, the emotions, those are bad, those are pathogens, that's a shame, I like my emotions. Actually, the Chinese medical view, and this is not just the Chinese medical view, it is a view shared by the Chinese arts in general, and certainly in Taoism and Neo-Confucianism and all sorts of things, that the natural state, when the system is in balance, when the viscera are balanced, and when the body is healthy, is that we naturally express de. We naturally express virtue. So this is a person's natural state when their deeper being is not distorted. And I think this isn't always stressed enough. Not stressed enough in Chinese medicine teachings, not stressed enough in a lot of cases. And for me, this has often been a useful thing to remember, because it's so easy to get bogged down in all of the pathology of ourselves, and also, if we're a clinician, of our clients, right? To just see the way people are out of balance, but to miss the fact that to be in balance for someone is to actually be something quite beautiful and quite profound. I have this quote here, this is actually from something I wrote, but it includes in it a quote from Mencius, who's a Neo-Confucian philosopher. Basically, the idea is that if one's heart mind, one's Xin, does not express morality, kindness, and goodness, it is not because they don't contain the seed of potential for such goodness, but rather, as Mencius explains, it is like the woodman's axes and the trees. If day after day they are chopped, how could they possibly retain their fineness? For there is nothing that will not grow if given the proper cultivation, and there is nothing that will not wither away if deprived of it. And the idea is, one of the metaphors that's often used in Mencius is this idea of sprouts of virtue, sprouts of de, that exist within each of our hearts. That if we are allowed to grow in a healthy way as humans, our natural being, right? If our nature is not obstructed in some way, we will we will express de, we will express virtue, which is a very it is in some ways, right? There are all these debates in different philosophical traditions, right? Is human nature fundamentally good? Is human nature fundamentally bad? Is there no such thing as a fundamental human nature, right? I'm not sure exactly, if you could find one single answer to that within the Chinese medical tradition, certainly, but in or in Chinese tradition, but it's debated across the board in all cultures. But this view is very much that the natural state of a human being is to express goodness, that people's natural state is duh. Although it is no small thing to actually express one's natural state, right? And most of us are highly distorted, right? We have veered far and perhaps much further away from our natural state than we actually realize. And usually for people, the process of going through some kind of cultivation process is realizing just how far they have fallen. Not to sound overly Christian about it, but there's something there. So what Men's saying is there's nothing that will wither away if it's deprived of the proper cultivation, right? So our de can wither away if it's not cultivated, but just like a seedling of a tree, right? That seedling contains within it the capacity to grow into this big, beautiful, healthy tree. If it's cultivated properly, right? If it's given the chance to express its nature fully. So yeah, this is essentially what I wrote here. The essential nature of a seedling is to grow into a full plant, just as the essential nature of a human is to grow into a good person. And truly, I think all of the traditions that co-evolved with Chinese medicine, Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism shared similar understandings as this, even if they use very different language. For instance, in Mahayana Buddhist traditions, right, there's a lot of talk about Buddha nature, or the Tathagata, which is the fundamental nature of mind, essentially saying that the fundamental nature of everyone's mind, of mind as such, the ground of being, is Buddha, is awakened. And so this is so it's good news. Our emotions may be distortions, but when those emotions are settled and cleared, and our natural state is allowed to manifest, it is duh. I think this is a very, very useful thing to keep in mind for anyone engaged in any process of self-cultivation, that the process is less one of making oneself into something that they aren't, and more a process of clearing away the obstructions to what one actually is. So the Wu De, all that is to say, of course, I'll go back to that idea. Clearing away the obstructions to what one is no small feat, right? It's not like it doesn't take a lot of work potentially, or effort, or even striving in many cases. There's sometimes a misunderstanding in a lot of just a lot of the world these days, and certainly in spiritual circles, that I think you don't really need to you just don't need to do anything, because your natural state is just this light that'll shine out if you just don't do anything. That's not true, because we're all heavily distorted, almost everybody, right? So it takes some doing to arrive at the new non-doing, right? And which is why in Chinese medicine, or in Taoism, it's talked about you have to weigh, you have to do, or until you can wu wei, until you can non-do, in a sense, at least in cultivational exercises. So the 5 virtues, or the 5 skillful qualities, are wisdom, which is associated with the water phase, the kidneys and bladder; benevolence, kindness, and compassion, the wood phase, the liver; love, and some say truth, some translate as truth, love and truth, fire. The earth is associated with thoughtfulness, nurturance, and support. There are different lists of the 5 virtues, and actually the Confucian list of the virtues is slightly different from the Taoist ones. This is sort of a combination of both, and this isn't actually totally textually specific or anything. I've thrown my own spin in a little bit here, but this is essentially the flavor of it. And then metal is respect and filial piety, which refers to a type of sort of respect for tradition, respect for lineage and family, that sort of a thing, which metal is very much about. So those are the 5 phases, the 5 virtues. And maybe that's all I have to say for today. No, I'll say a few more things. So, so what this means is that the healing process to heal means to become more transparent to the. It means to sort of, in a sense, get out of the way and clear the things that obstruct this natural good nature. And this means that healing fundamentally becomes being or involves becoming a better person, a person with more integrity. Now, today, we don't usually, I think in our culture, we don't usually like the idea that there is any kind of moral imperative or moral connection with healing or getting sick, right? The idea that we would potentially get ill or fall ill because there is something perhaps distorted in our nature, or that we maybe aren't being as good as we could be, that there's a way that we've sort of fallen short of expressing goodness. We don't like the idea that someone would get sick because they were a bad person, right? The sort of, Catholic Christian overtones for a lot of people who have been traumatized by this kind of what feels like an overly puritanical idea that, if you're a sinner, you're bad and stuff. That can rub people the wrong way. And of course, this is not blaming the victim, right? At one point, a while ago, I posted something online talking about, the process of healing and the process of coming into greater integrity within oneself. And someone responded and was quite upset with me, and said, this suggests that people get sick because they're bad or because they've sinned or something. And this is, or that it's, no, that's what they said. They said this suggests that it's people's fault when they get sick in certain cases, right? And in many cases, yeah, it is. But that doesn't, it doesn't mean that it is their fault in the sense that they should be blamed or punished or shamed or anything like that. It simply means that because this is the framework of Chinese medicine, right? That when we are in a distorted state, those distortions manifest as imbalances in our bodies. And so, and that creates illness because the mind and the body are not separate, right? So a distortion in the body can create distortions in the mind, and distortions in the mind can create distortions in the body. And certainly in my life and my experience, and certainly what I've seen in the clinic over and over, it is true that doing things that we know are not right and not in line with our deeper virtuous nature, our natural goodness, leads to illness, right? If we are not acting in line with what we know is right, we can get sick. We can get sick. And this is not to shame people for when they get sick, or to tell them that they're bad or something like that. That's not the point. It is simply that there is just to point out that there is a causal connection between these things, and seeing these connections can actually be deeply empowering for someone to help them heal. It's not a disempowering system, right? This can feel very disempowering to people, but it shouldn't be, right? If anything, it's saying that your embodied being is essentially connected to who you are. And so if you you have more actual agency over your state and your illness than you often think. Something I have found myself reflecting on a lot lately, as I am just recovering from an illness. So doing things that we know are not right, not in line with our deeper nature, our virtue, our natural goodness, can lead to illness. Remembering that who we are on a deeper level, our natural state is in line with duh, can sometimes be an aid in rectifying these things. Here's a very beautiful quote from a 6th century philosopher. If the spirit is at peace, the heart is in harmony. When the heart is in harmony, the body is whole. If the spirit becomes aggravated, the heart wavers. And when the heart wavers, the spirit becomes injured. If one seeks to heal the physical body, therefore, one needs to regulate the spirit first. So this is a view that, in a sense, and you find this in medical texts, some of the earliest medical texts will say all illness comes from the heart. And what they mean is not just the heart is one of the Zongfu organs. They refer really the Xin, the who you are, right? The heart of you. Often we do not in this culture make connections between our physical state and our state as a person, because we tend to think of the mind and body as so separate in this dualist fashion, right? If we think of the mind and body as separate, then there isn't an immediate connection there. But all traditions throughout the world, until fairly recently in medicine, understood there to be a moral connection with medicine. And so the field of ethics is not just relevant to the medical practitioner, right? Today, of course, all doctors take ethics classes, right? Honestly, they're, as I understand them, based on some very basic analytic philosophy and relatively lame. But we do still recognize in our culture that it is important for a doctor to think about ethics, and of course the field of bioethics, right, which has emerged in the last century, is the main way that has gone about in the field of medicine. I have actually at some point I'll do a video critiquing modern bioethics and suggesting some alternatives, but especially for Chinese medicine, right? Bioethics, the field of bioethics is not sufficient or appropriate for the field of Chinese medicine. We need much more because an understanding ethics and thinking in terms of ethics is foundational to Chinese medicine for this reason. Because, and this is not talked about enough in the field of Chinese medicine, that the foundation of Chinese medicine is this, right? Is supporting people in healing their bodies so that they can express De, so that they can become a better person, a person who's more aligned with their life path, who's more connected to others, who's more connected to the world, who's more connected to who they are and what they're supposed to do here. This is really what Chinese medicine is fundamentally about. It's about healing the human body, not as a physical object, not just as an anatomical object, as we tend to think of in our culture, but healing the body as an embodied person. And an embodied person is a moral, ethical agent. So I haven't reviewed these slides for a while, so I'm not... Okay, yeah. So you know what? Let's stop there for tonight. I think that's good. Continuing our introduction to the field of Yangsheng, and this piece especially is really essential for how I'm going to be presenting this material, because of course it is I will go over the lists of things and guidelines from the tradition, what to eat, how to sleep, when to sleep, all these different things. We'll do like a super deep dive, I think, probably into dietary therapy. But having all this in the background and understanding where illness actually comes from and what illness actually is, right? As we discussed at the beginning, from a Chinese medicine perspective, illness is any way that we struggle to adapt to change in our lives, which means a way that we struggle to accept life, to accept ourselves. And one of the ways that we struggle to adapt to change in our lives is when we know that there's something we need to do the right thing, and we don't do the right thing, right? When our kind of the whisperings of our being point us in a particular direction, and we ignore our ethical intuitions. It's a kind of resistance of our deeper self, right? When we know what's right to do, but we somehow kind of betray that, and that is a primary source of illness in this life. And that it can be hard, because sometimes we find ourselves in situations in life where we struggle to listen to ourselves on a deep level, and we struggle to know what is the right thing to do here. But that struggle is fundamentally our struggle to adapt to change. So I'll leave it there, and we'll pick up